Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week, and we are getting back into our normal schedule as best we can here. So we're going to go through breaches, not just inside of the whole Russia invasion of Ukraine situation, but we're going to do everything. And as always, I'd like to start by thanking the following people that sent me a chunk of these, and that would be Barrett Peterson, Jason Dance, Jacqueline Wolf, and Chris Fallon. Thank you so much. And if you have a tip for me, I'm more than happy to take it. And basically give you a shout out here as well as on my nationally syndicated radio show. And with that, let's dive right in and start with Transunion in South Africa. Now, they just disclosed that attackers breached one of their servers using stolen credentials and demanded a ransom payment, essentially not to release the data. Pretty standard. Now, this is the African division of Transunion. They operate in 8 African countries, and essentially the system infiltrator or attacker appears to have exfiltrated data stored in that server and then extorted Transunion by demanding a ransom payment, and there you go. The company has noted that they will not actually pay the attackers, and so if you have anything to do with Transunion in those 8 African countries, including South Africa, heads up to you. Moving on, I want to give you guys an update on Cafe Press, their 2019 data breach, because the U.S. Federal Trade Commissioner, FTC, has proposed a settlement that will fine the former owner of the U.S. custom clothing and merchandise retailer, Cafe Press, $500,000 for attempting to cover up a 2019 data breach that exposed the sensitive data of millions of users. Attackers, if you remember, breached Cafe Press's servers in February of 2019, subsequently publishing the personal information of more than 23 million of their users on known cybercrime forums. This included millions of email addresses, passwords, unencrypted names, physical addresses, security question answers, and more than 180,000 unencrypted social security numbers. That was a massive data breach, so there you go. $500,000 would have been cheaper, just to be transparent. Heads up. Moving on. Let's talk about the Chelan Douglas Health District out of the state of Washington. And honestly, the vast majority of the breaches this week are healthcare breaches, and here we go. So we're going to start with Chelan Douglas Health District in the state of Washington, because this past Tuesday, they announced a data breach that resulted in the loss of personal and medical information for an undisclosed number of people. The health district put out a notice at the bottom of their website this past Tuesday, following the conclusion of a cybersecurity investigation on February 12th. That concluded some of their information was accessed in their network back in July of last year. Now, we're talking full names, social security, dates of birth and death, financial account information and medical information, treatments, medical records, patient numbers, and or health insurance policy information. So if you have anything to do with the Chelan Douglas Health District in Washington State, they should be contacting you. If not, you might want to check in. Moving on. Let's talk about South Denver Cardiologist Associates, obviously in the south of Denver, Colorado. They recently announced they were a victim of a cyber attack in January of this year, and essentially files were accessed and stolen by attackers. We're again talking dates of birth, social security, driver's license numbers, patient account numbers, health insurance information, clinical information such as physician names, dates, and types of services and diagnosis. So heads up to you, South Denver Cardiology Associates patients. Moving on, let's talk about Labet Health in Parsons, Kansas. They noticed unauthorized activity in their systems on October 14th of last year. The investigation revealed that between October 15th and the 24th, an unauthorized party was able to access and acquire certain information off of their network. Again, we are talking about social security numbers, medical treatment, diagnosis information, treatment costs, dates of service, prescription information, Medicare or Medicaid numbers, and health insurance information. There you go. Moving on. Let's talk about Wheeling Right Health in West Virginia. I presume Wheeling, West Virginia. On January 18th of this year, they discovered that their organization was a victim of a cyber attack and encrypted their systems, aka ransomware. And for Wheeling Health Right in Wheeling, West Virginia, we're talking full names, postal address, email address, phone number, driver's license, medical record, social security, tax information, income information, and other health information about patients who applied for or received services from Wheeling Health Right in West Virginia. Heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about Singapore Airlines, getting off health for a moment here. And basically, we are talking specifically about their in-flight retailer known as Chris Shop. If you shopped with Chris Shop on a Singapore Airlines flight, heads up to you, because they just had a data breach which affected the personal information of 4,749 Chris Shop customers. We're talking names, email addresses, residential addresses, contact numbers, Chris Shop e-voucher numbers. Additionally, Additionally, the bank account information on 165 of those customers, as well as the Chris Flyer accounts of 17 people, were exposed. But they're saying password and credit card information was not exposed. This happened as a result of a phishing attack on the 8th of March by an unknown party that essentially got into an employee's email account. And there we go. Heads up to you, all you in-flight shoppers. Chris Shop has been hit. Moving on. Let's talk about food manufacturer Greencore Group plc out of the United Kingdom. In a letter last month, Greencore admitted to experiencing an IT disruption last December with information on staff, such as their roles, salaries, and personal information like bank account details and UK national insurance numbers had been accessed. At least 35 employees of the food manufacturer, basically employed at the site in Hatfield in the UK, are considering legal action and have actually met with the law firm Hayes Connor. So Greencore, I think, is about to get sued. So heads up to you if you're an employee of Greencore Group plc out of the UK. Moving on, let's head back to healthcare and talk about Norwood Clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. They suffered a cyber attack that impacted 228,000 individuals. Now, apparently on October 22nd of last year, Norwood Clinic discovered that it was a victim of a cyber attack that resulted in unauthorized data access. We are talking about patient names, contact information, driver's license numbers, social security, birth dates, health insurance policy numbers, and quote-unquote limited health information. So if you belong to the Norwood Health Clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, heads up to you. Moving on. Let's talk about the Lakeshore Savings Bank in Dunkirk, which is in western New York State. They disclosed in a financial statement to investors that they had suffered a data breach after attackers gained access to customers' personal information. Don't know the amount, but the bank told affected customers their name, address, and account numbers were leaked on November 24th of last year. So if you have anything to do or use Lakeshore Savings Bank in Dunkirk in western New York State, heads up to you. Moving on. Let's talk about OK Foods. They are a large-scale chicken producer in the state of Arkansas. They are facing a proposed class action stemming from a data breach which allegedly compromised employees' personal information because of the risk of identity theft, and that is according to a federal judge. So, in other words, the class action is going through because a federal judge in Arkansas said, yes, we are going through. Now, Calissa Coffey, sued her employer in 2021 after allegedly learning that an unknown third party had accessed an OK Foods email which contained the personal information of employees, I believe including hers. Now, Ms. Coffey, who works at OK Foods and has worked there since 2016, says that employees' names, birth dates, addresses, and social security numbers were compromised. We are starting to see a lot of this, especially with larger corporations where employee data or customer data is hit. Class actions tend to be flying left and right, which also I think is impacting the cyber insurance company. But quite frankly, that's a whole other video podcast and segment on my radio show. So let's move on, head on back to healthcare. Like I said, crazy healthcare week, because we want to talk about Duncan Regional Hospital in the state of Oklahoma. Now, essentially, they recently announced that they were a victim of a cyber attack on January 20th, which is when they detected suspicious activity in their systems. And again, patient names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, social security numbers, appointment information, such as dates of service and healthcare provider names, as well as quote-unquote limited treatment information, were exposed. So heads up, patients of Duncan Regional Hospital in Oklahoma. Let's move on to Central Indiana Orthopedics, because earlier this month, Central Indiana Orthopedics announced they were a victim of a cyber attack that was detected on October 16th of last year. Obviously, they took steps to secure the breach, but we are talking about names, addresses, social security numbers, and limited medical information. Once again, heads up, Central Indiana Orthopedics patients, Moving on. Let's do another healthcare because, well, quite frankly, 'tis the week. Care Oregon Advantage. Obviously, you know what state they're in. So Care Oregon Advantage, the incident occurred on January 27th of this year, when a contracted consultant was not authorized to receive protected health information, basically received in an email attachment. That's right. They accidentally sent an email attachment, I'm presuming Excel, to a third party that was in their ecosystem. This is a contractor that they have. The consultant immediately alerted Care Oregon and destroyed the document. That's 10,468 past and present members were impacted by this. member name ID number, meaning Medicare in some cases, Medicaid as well, and dates of birth were exposed, but hopefully quickly destroyed by this contractor. Nevertheless, Care Oregon Advantage has to declare a HIPAA breach. There you are, heads up, Care Oregon Advantage patient. Moving on, let's talk about Servicenow. And this is an interesting one because Servicenow is an American software company based in Santa Clara, California, that develops cloud computing platform, or basically software as a service is what I'm trying to say, that basically helps services or companies manage digital workflows and enterprise operations. And here's the thing, a ton of organizations use Servicenow. Now, a configuration in their SaaS platform, software as a service platform of Servicenow, is leaking data on the internet. News of this misconfiguration mistake found that nearly 70% of all Servicenow instances that were tested basically were reported on this past Wednesday by App Omni, a SaaS security provider, meaning 70% of all Servicenow customers are leaking data onto the internet, and that is a huge problem. Now, according to App Omni, this misconfiguration resulted from a combination of customer-managed configurations and over-provisioning permissions of guest users. Servicenow has more than 25,000 customers, most of them with 50 to 200 employees, with revenues that range from 1 million to 10 million. So we are talking about a slew of small businesses across the United States and the world that are now susceptible. Small businesses obviously constitute something like 62 or 63% of all data breaches. This isn't helping. So if you have Servicenow, you've got to go check in. There's a lot of small businesses out there. And moving on, we have to talk about Meta, aka Facebook, because essentially they are being fined 17 million euros or 19 million US by Ireland's data regulator. Now, the decision by the DPC, or Data Protection Commissioner in Ireland, was based on the results of an inquiry into 12 data breach notifications received by the DPC between June 7th of 2018 and December 4th of that same year, 2018. Now, the probe examined just how far Meta platforms had complied with the requirements of GDPR articles regarding the processing of personal data relevant to the breach notifications. In a statement released this past Tuesday, the DPC said that the inquiry had found that Meta platforms infringed on at least 2 separate articles in the GDPR, and I quote, "The DPC found that Meta platforms failed to have in place appropriate technical and organizational measures which would enable it to readily demonstrate the security measures that it implemented in practice to protect EU users' data in the context of the 12 personal data breaches." That again is according to the DPC. Now, a spokesperson for Meta Platforms, aka Facebook, said that it, quote, "processes continue to evolve," and that the company would, quote, "carefully consider Tuesday's decision." The spokesperson also said that, quote, "the fine is about record-keeping practices from 2018 that we have since updated, and it did not signal a failure to protect people's information." We will see what happens there. Facebook always in the news, always violating our privacy when it comes to these kinds of things, according to basically a ton of different Breaches of the Week videos I've done. So we're going to see what happens here. But this is definitely not the first tangle that they've had with GDPR. And Ireland's GDPR section, the DPC, tends to be one of the most aggressive in the entire EU. So we'll see what's going on there. Moving on, let's talk about the California State Bar, because they earlier this week said that a quote-unquote hack led to a months-long online disclosure of 260,000 confidential attorney discipline cases, and instead they are now blaming the breach on, quote, "unknown security vulnerabilities" in basically this database. Apparently, this database known as Judy Records, specifically the website, was leaking in some way. I don't have much more information there, but if you're an attorney in California, heads up to you, especially if you've had confidential attorney discipline cases that you've been involved in or have been targeted. Those may have been leaked to the general public due to quote unquote unknown security vulnerabilities in the Judy Records website database. So there you go, heads up, California State Bar. And finally, and we have 2 finalies. The first one I want to basically update you on is Russian data breaches this week due to their invasion of Ukraine. I said I'd keep you up to date. You know I will. Yesterday's video obviously was an interview with basically the first deputy minister of education and science from Ukraine. She's also a member of parliament, so I am definitely keeping on up to date on the Ukrainian situation. Now, The Verge had a great write-up on this. I've gotten other other links from some of the people that sent me links, like Security Affairs, for example. Jason, thank you for sending me that. But The Verge had, I think, the best write-up on it so far, and so I'm cribbing and quoting heavily from them. Now, here's what's going on. Basically, as the Russian invasion moves into its third week, and we are heading into week 4 sooner than later. Actually, we might actually be now. I think we're about ready to. We're actually heading into week 4. We're about a month in. I'm just doing this on the fly here on that in my brain. So as we move into the third week, just past the third week, unconventional actors continue to target Russian-backed businesses with a string of hacks and data leaks. The latest apparently referencing pro-hacktivism comments made by Hillary Clinton. That's right, former First Lady, former Secretary of State, former presidential candidate Hillary. She is being quoted by hacktivists. Now, the target organization here is Transneft. This is the Russian state-controlled oil pipeline giant. This past Thursday, essentially leak hosting website Distributed Denial of Secrets published a link to 79 gigabytes of email from the Omega company, which is the research and development division of Transneft. Now, headquarters in Moscow, Transneft is the largest pipeline company in the world. As a state-owned Russian enterprise, it's now blocked from receiving investments from the United States market under the terms of sanctions against Russia, not to mention several other European countries, NATO allies, that have also taken that step as well to cut off Russian oil from Europe. Now, its in-house R&D unit, the Omega company, produces a range of high-tech acoustic and temperature monitoring systems for oil pipelines, which, as Verge says, ironically focus on leak detection. Now, the email leaks, though, appear to contain the contents of multiple email accounts from company employees, including not only email messages, but file attachments containing invoices and product shipment details, and image files showing server racks and other equipment configurations. Now, some emails reviewed by The Verge and other publications were timestamped as recently as March 15th. Obviously, that is 5 days from when I am making this video. It is March 20th right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you. And there you go. So unusually though, and this is what I find interesting, the note basically from Distributed Denial of Secrets accompanying the email upload, the source dedicated the leaks to Hillary Clinton. In an interview with NBC in February, Clinton took the unconventional step of encouraging Anonymous to launch cyber attacks against Russia. And I quote Hillary Clinton, "People who love freedom and understand that our way of life depends on supporting those who believe in freedom as well, could be engaged in cyber support of those in the streets in Russia." Now, while the Ukrainian government has actively encouraged hacktivism against Russian government targets, it is an uncommon position, obviously, for a high-profile U.S. politician to adopt, especially one that was a former Secretary of State, let alone was in the White House as the First Lady. Now, Ms. Clinton's statement might have been intended as an echo of her one-time presidential rival, Donald Trump's 2016 request to Russian hackers to release her private emails if they had them. Now, if that was really interesting, because if you remember that press conference back from 2016, Donald Trump basically said, "Russia, if you're listening, release the 30,000 emails that, Hillary Clinton lost or destroyed or, whatever it was." And sure enough, a whole bunch of emails got dumped, specifically from Leon Panetta, a close ally and a former cabinet member of the Obama administration, dumped all of his emails out there, many of which included Hillary Clinton. So there you go. But Transneft got hit. They got hit hard. Basically, the world, again, is engaging in cyber warfare against Russia. Even if you are not officially sanctioned by a government, the governments are turning a blind eye and kind of giving you a thumbs up. So with that, let's go to our finally, because I think this is actually a rather important one. And I'm asking the question, who watches the watcher? And essentially what we're talking about is the Irish Data Protection Commissioner. I literally just talked about them with Facebook and Meta. They leveled this $19 million or 17 million euro fine against them. But here's the news that we're really talking about here. And TechCrunch had a really good write-up on this. But here's what's going on. And I quote TechCrunch right out of the gate. Ireland's evasive response to a major security complaint filed against Google's ad tech the year the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, came into application is the target of a new lawsuit that accuses the Data Protection Commission of years of inaction over what the complaints assert is, subquote, the largest data breach ever. There you go. Now, local press in Ireland has been reported that the Irish High Court has actually agreed to hear this suit of the people against the DPC, the Data Protection Commission. Now, the litigation has been prepared by the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. I'm assuming that is similar to the American Civil Liberties Union, whose senior fellow, Johnny Ryan, has been named as the plaintiff. At issue here is the DPC's response to a long-running complaint about Google's role in the high-velocity trading of web users' personal data to determine which ads get served to them, and more specifically, the lack of attention the data trading systems of the tracking-based advertising industry pays to security. Security, of course, is the key principle of the EU's flagship, basically data protection regime. The DPC, as I mentioned when I was talking about Facebook, is one of the most aggressive in all of the European Union, and I'm reading a lot about Ireland's DPC when I'm reading a lot about GDPR violations. Now, the civil liberties suit, basically out of Ireland, is basically accusing the DPC of failure to act in what it couches as a, quote, massive Google data breach. Now, Mr. Ryan will be familiar to anybody who's been following ad tech's mounting legal woes in Europe, because he's been the driving force behind a series of complaints and lawsuits since 2018, which is the year the GDPR went online, and he's been targeting high-velocity trading of people's data for real-time ad auctions, such as real-time bidding, also known as RTB. Now, a former ad tech insider turned whistleblower, Ryan has amped up pressure on the industry to reform through a series of strategic GDPR complaints, meaning he's using the law against these companies in order to force them to essentially become more private, which I think is great. In September of 2020, for example, he published a dossier of evidence highlighting how the online ad targeting industry profiles internet users' intimate characteristics without their knowledge or consent, calling out the DPC for ongoing inaction over this real-time bidding security complaint that was lodged in 2018 when Google essentially, basically this complaint was lodged against Google. And so there you go. On the 2018 Google ad tech complaint, the DPC has announced only some procedural steps. And so following the original September 2018 complaint, basically, both Google and the online industry body known as IAB Europe, these are two key players in real-time bidding, Ireland opened up a formal inquiry into Google's ad tech in May of 2019, and the regulator, there you go, is essentially looking at this, but Ireland did not open an inquiry based on the substance of Ryan's complaint. Rather, it opened up what is known as a non-volition inquiry, saying that it would seek to, quote, establish whether processing of personal data carried out at each stage of an advertising transaction is in compliance with the relevant provisions of the GDPR, including the lawful basis for processing, the principles of transparency and data minimization, as well as Google's retention practices. Now, all of this basically means Google has been violating the bejesus out of the privacy of EU citizens, obviously because the EU has the GDPR and much more stringent data security and privacy laws than we have here in the United States. They've also been violating American privacy to the nth degree, but in EU, they have the ability to quash this. EU citizens have the ability to complain to governing bodies in the GDPR. One of the most forward ones, as I mentioned, is Ireland's DPC. Now, to balance this out, while the DPC has been making news, I've talked about the Ireland's DPC here in GDPR violations, as I do breaches of the week every week. They have been rather proactive, but Google is such a behemoth, and when this complaint was lodged in September of 2018, the GDPR was only months old. I speculate that a lot of this was still being organized, a lot of this was still being calculated. In most Western legal jurisprudence, you also have the ability to appeal, to delay, to do all of these things, and I have no doubt that Google and their $1 trillion net worth, roughly, give or take, essentially has an absolute army of lawyers in Europe that are doing exactly that, as they are shuffling things around, fighting these, appealing these, whatever that is, in that legal system. And so I think the DPC is at a disadvantage. Now, to Mr. Ryan's point, We can't sit here on our laurels. Basically, if we are allowing them to use the legal system to delay, to essentially skirt data privacy laws as they continue to violate data privacy laws or not change things, and I'm not alleging that here, but if you're basically listening to the wording here from TechCrunch, that's essentially what people are alleging. This is a huge, huge problem. And so there has to be a balance. Do we fund the DPC more? Do we put more stringent guidelines on GDPR that says the data protection commissions have to act in a certain threshold if the violation is gross enough? Meaning, if I'm running a platform and I leak 50,000 users, great. I maybe have to face fines. I may have to do other things and all of that. But you know what? Maybe it takes them 6 months. But if I'm doing 50 million or 5 billion or leaking, 10 billion people's information, around the globe, and billions of people use Google. Not that we have 10 billion people on the planet, but you know what I'm getting at here, then we have a very serious problem. Because if they're not being held accountable in a specific amount of time, meaning faster, then all they can do is delay and delay and delay, and then nothing really changes, or changes comes very incrementally. So I'm going to watch this one. I think it's an interesting one. Who watches the Watchers? Apparently, we all watch the Watchers, and now they're being sued. So there you go. I think it's a very interesting thing. Those were your breaches of the week. Were you affected? Let me know. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.